I am Lindsay Gray with VECINA, and I'm here with Amy Maldonado, an attorney who has worked on a lot of family separation cases. And we've been receiving a number of questions from people about family separation and how it happened, why it happened, and some of the facts around family separation. So, welcome, Amy. Can you tell us a
Thanks.
little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am an immigration attorney. I am located in East Lansing, Michigan. I moved here from Texas in 2015. And I would do business immigration cases for my practice, but I do pro bono advocacy for immigrant families and asylum seeking families and children. And that's actually how I got involved in the family separation issues. So family separation actually started in 2017. Those were the first cases that we saw. And we were trying to alert the big organizations like the impact litigation places that this was going on. And what we later find out is that they ran a pilot program in 2017. And so they didn't implement it large scale until 2018, but there were families separated before 2018 under this policy. And so basically the idea of the Trump administration, and this is Stephen Miller's policy within the administration, was that they wanted to make asylum seeking families from Central America they wanted to make it so difficult and so painful for them to seek the protection of the laws of the United States from persecution and torture that they would give up and go away. And so they came up with this idea that if you take their kids away from them, then they'll stop applying for asylum. So the idea was to treat asylum seekers so badly that they would give up their claims to protection, which is heartbreaking. And there are lots and lots of documents on this. There was congressional testimony from a DHHS whistleblower. The government knew in advance that it was going to psychologically traumatize these children for life, that they were going to cause irreparable harm to the kids. And they did it specifically for deterrence. And Secretary of Homeland Security at the time, Kirstjen Nielsen, went out to the public and lied and said it wasn't for deterrence. And later we have these documents surface saying that is the reason that they did it. And deterrence of people from seeking a lawful process is not a valid reason to do something like this. But what they did was they took people who entered without inspection, or IWI, and they would charge the parents with misdemeanor illegal entry. So in the past, that was not a big enough, if somebody crosses over and turns themselves in to CBP or gets picked up by CBP, they wouldn't be criminally prosecuted. They would save criminal prosecutions for, people who are committing other crimes or people who are engaging in illegal reentry who've been deported multiple times. But no other administration has ever done this. And so by saying we've got to arrest the parents for this misdemeanor, and now we've got to separate them from their children, they would take the children, and the children that I represented were all transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. But as we know, many of them were held in these like holding pen type facilities and warehouses because this was, it was instituted. There were large numbers of children that this impacted, and then it was shut down within months because the public outrage was so intense. But
Wow.
one of the things I see on Facebook and social media from my friends who don't understand this issue is, oh, well, people are paying, human smugglers and coyotes to bring their kids across. And that's a whole other conversation about things like MPP and the brutality that we're subjecting asylum-seeking families to with our policies. But every single child in family separation came with their family and was separated from their family. Like that was, the point of the family separation policy. So Aldea, the People's Justice Center, which is one of the nonprofits that serves the 3 family detention centers in the United States, we got some calls from Brazilian families whose children had been separated from 2 Brazilian families, actually, whose children had been separated from their fathers. So 2 boys, they were 9 and 15, and they were taken from the border at New Mexico and shipped to Chicago to a shelter, which is over 1,000 miles away from where their parents were. And it was the government's intention to deport the parents without reunifying them with their sons. And so Bridget Cambria and I, and a pro bono team from DLA Piper and a pro bono team from Robin Solomon and Pat in Chicago, we brought a lawsuit, and we specifically sued under the Flores Settlement Agreement, which protects children. And we also, basically we sued because you can challenge a child's detention placement, and we challenged that placement as improper because it improperly separated the child from the accompanying parent. And in that case, we got a temporary restraining order against the government, and the government's arguments are very legalistic. And so in every case, their argument is there is no jurisdiction of the court to review this because it's a decision related to a removal. And this is all really technical legal stuff, but they did not have a substantive great argument for why it was reasonable or good to separate children from their parents and deport parents alone. And the only way at that time, for a brief time period, we were preventing that was by having a team of, 10, 12 attorneys run into federal court and get a federal judge's order. And so obviously that takes a huge amount of resources. Not everybody's going to get connected to an attorney or a team of attorneys in time who could help them. And then of course the ACLU filed the Mizell litigation. And then Bridget and Shay Fluharty, Bridget's the executive director of Aldea, and Shay Fluharty filed a separate lawsuit in Washington, D.C. called MMM that ended up getting consolidated with Mizell. And so we were able to have, as an organization, some voice in what the settlement looked like after that. But, there was, I am hard pressed to explain to people who say to me, how can this be? If this is really true, I have a hard time believing that our government did this intentionally to children. And it's 100% true. There are a million documents that prove it. There's a DHS Inspector General's report. There's a DHHS Inspector General's report. I believe the Attorney General just came out with something, DOJ came out with something about this last week. So the quote that I've heard repeated is state-sanctioned child abuse. And that's what it was.
And so basically what was happening, just to sort of sum up, the government was using family separation as a deterrent, essentially, for asylum seekers to come to the United States and legally request asylum. They didn't want people coming here. And so they basically said, well, if we separate parents from their kids, then maybe word will get out and it'll be so bad that they'll give up their claim. And less people will come, number one, and people that have come might leave because the alternative is to be separated from their kids. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes,
and then
correct.
The argument in court that they were making after y'all filed lawsuits about this to protect the children is just that the court didn't have legal jurisdiction.
Yes, that's it. That because of the jurisdiction stripping provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which say they limit the review of the federal courts over orders of removal, and review of expedited removal is severely limited. And so you basically can only go get federal judicial review of expedited removal, which was what almost all of these parents were in. Your only grounds are the person is really a citizen or a lawful permanent resident or an asylee, or this is not the person who this removal order pertains to. So, we've been seeing this, a lot of abuses of this under the Trump administration, because no matter how many policies they depart from, the government's position is the courts can't review it. And there's a strong presumption for a lot of reasons involving the Constitution and fundamental fairness in favor of judicial review. The judiciary is a separate branch of government to check the powers of the executive. And what I think is really notable about this administration is that all of their policies around asylum are designed to undermine people getting asylum. They want the fewest possible people applying for and obtaining asylum. So for example, today is the last day of a comment period on a new regulation that says you have 15 days to apply for asylum. Well, we were seeing last summer, people were being held in border detention for 90 days, for 75 days along the border. I mean, you have a statutory and a constitutional right to counsel that you can't access. And it violates the statute because the statute says you get a year to file your asylum claim. So
there's been some recent publications, even as most recent as this week, in major news outlets about that there are 500 and I believe it's 45 children that are still separated from their parents. And these policies went into effect in 2017, and then of course sort of blew up in 2018. how is that possible? I mean, were there safeguards when the government was separating children from their parents? And yeah.
Not only were there not, I mean, the issue was they didn't have a robust system of tracking everybody. So once DHS, CBP separated the parent and the child in their system, their cases were separate and they're not connected anywhere. And HHS didn't have a mechanism for tracking this well. There was a news article that said that Secretary of DHHS, Alex Azar, when he was confronted with the fact that the records were terrible and not sufficient to reunify parents and children, that he suggested destroying them instead of actually connecting parents and children. So there really were not safeguards, and the government knew it in advance. They were warned by multiple people. They were warned by, I think the DOJ report said that US attorneys recommended not separating children under the age of 12 because they were not mature enough to find their parents again. And we've seen that come true. And, the high number of reunifications that have occurred are not due to the US government. They're due to NGOs like El Otro Lado and other organizations traveling to Central America and tracking down kids' parents. The federal government doesn't care that these parents and children have been separated, possibly forever.
Wow. So
Yeah.
family separation is still a problem now.
So it's not a policy in the same way, but it is still occurring. For example, today is Friday. I want to say was it 2 weeks ago? Within the last 2 weeks, a Honduran woman gave birth in Eagle Pass, Texas, and her child needed to be transferred to the NICU. And of course, under the 14th Amendment, any child born on US soil is a US citizen. So they posted a press release about rescuing her, and I'm putting that in air quotes, and calling, basically they said, we rescued her, EMS came and took her to the hospital, and the babies got life-flighted to NICU. And what they actually did was they took her to the hospital. She was done about 3 o'clock in the morning. When she took a shower at 8 a.m. and came out, her baby was gone, and they took her to border detention. And then they returned her that same day to sign the transfer papers for the child to go to the NICU. And one of the things that has not hit the press about this is that because the baby is a US citizen, that was it. There was no adult, nobody with that baby at the NICU until we reunified her with her mother. So we contacted multiple congressional offices. I got this through Every Last One, which is an organization that works on reunifying parents and kids and making sure that children in immigration detention are protected. They're opposed to the detention of children, which is, universally condemned around the world as a human rights violation. Children do not belong in prison. But I got the case through them, and we were able to get a reporter at the Los Angeles Times, Molly O'Toole, who won a Pulitzer for her immigration reporting. She did an article on it immediately and got into a Twitter fight with the CBP chief, the border chief, and the Commissioner Mark Morgan, which was hilarious. And we had their commitment by that evening. So I think I got the case at 3 p.m. We had their commitment by that evening that they were going to release the mother so she could be reunified with the child, which she has been. And the baby was actually just released from NICU and is doing much better. Although we're having other, it's hard to get a birth certificate for a baby that's born in a field, surprisingly.
I can imagine. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Amy, yeah, thank you so much for your stories and also an overview of sort of how the law's working. I know there's lots of questions right now, and so I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I should say that I'm not the one doing these reunifications. I think I already said that, didn't I? Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah, no, thank you. You're not doing the reunifications now, but you're working to,
right.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always done, so.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yep.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.